There is a version of you that nobody talks about in polite company. A version that doesn't check his phone every 5 minutes waiting for a reply. A version that doesn't rearrange his entire schedule to please someone who barely makes an effort. A version that doesn't apologize for having standards, for having ambition, for choosing himself first. That version of you isn't arrogant. He isn't cold. He's simply decided. And the world, this loud, chaotic, distracted world, has never needed that version of you more than it does right now. Somewhere along the line, men were sold a story that said the highest thing a man could do was give everything, his time, his silence, his dignity, just to keep the peace, just to be chosen, just to not be alone. And millions of men bought that story. They shrunk themselves down. They lowered their voices. They waited. They begged, not always with words, but with their behavior, with their patience, with the way they kept showing up for people who were halfway out the door. But here's what that story never told you. Begging doesn't create attraction. Begging doesn't create respect. And it certainly doesn't build the kind of life a man is capable of building when he finally decides to stop waiting for permission and start moving with purpose. The man who begs is always one rejection away from collapse. The man who decides is always one decision away from everything changing. This isn't about being hard. This isn't about closing your heart. This is about understanding your value before someone else assigns it for you. Because if you don't decide who you are, the world will decide for you, and it won't be generous. What you're about to hear took some men years to understand. Some never got there at all. But if you stay with this until the end, something is going to shift in how you see yourself, how you carry yourself, and how you move through the world. That shift begins right now. Before we go any further, if you found this video, it wasn't by accident. The algorithm doesn't send a man to content like this unless something inside him is already looking for it. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you've been doing everything right and still feeling like you're losing ground. Maybe you just want to understand yourself better and build something real. Whatever brought you here, welcome. This channel exists for one reason: to give men the kind of honest, grounded perspective that used to be passed down through generations. The kind of wisdom that didn't come from a book or a trend. It came from men who had lived, who had failed, who had rebuilt, and who understood that a man's greatest asset is not his money or his looks or his charm. It's his clarity, his decisiveness, his unshakable understanding of what he stands for. Over the next few chapters, we are going to go deep. We're going to talk about mindset, about standards, about what it really means to lead your own life, and why so many men are silently struggling because nobody ever gave them a straight answer about any of this. So here's what I need from you right now. If this content speaks to something real in you, hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already, because what's coming in the next few weeks is going to build on everything we start today. And drop a comment below telling me, what country and city are you watching from? I want to know where the decided men are in this world. Let's build this community one honest comment at a time. Now, let's get into it. There is an exact moment. Most men can't pinpoint it on a calendar, but they can feel it in their bones when something shifts. It's not a dramatic event. It's not a breakdown or a breakthrough in the Hollywood sense. It's quieter than that. It's the moment a man looks at his own life and realizes that everything he's been doing, all the effort, all the accommodation, all the careful walking on eggshells, none of it was building anything. It was just keeping things from falling apart. And there is a profound difference between building and maintaining. One moves you forward. The other just keeps you in place. The man who is always asking for approval, asking for validation, asking for a sign that he's enough, is a man who has outsourced the most important job in his life. He's handed the keys to his self-worth to someone else, and then wondered why he never feels in control. It doesn't matter how successful he is professionally, how good he looks, or how much effort he puts into every relationship. If his sense of value is contingent on external confirmation, he's always one withdrawal away from crisis. Deciding is different. Deciding means you've done the internal work first. You've sat with yourself, not always comfortably, and figured out what you actually believe, what you actually want, and what you're no longer willing to tolerate. Deciding doesn't require an audience. It doesn't need applause. In fact, the truest decisions a man makes are the ones nobody else ever sees. The moment he chooses to stop a pattern, to walk away from something that was draining him, to invest his energy somewhere it will actually grow. The world teaches men to be reactive. React to what she does. React to what the market does. React to what people say about you. Reactivity feels like engagement. It feels like you're in the game. But reactive men are never in control. They're always one step behind, always responding, always adjusting to a situation that someone else defined. Decisive men set the terms, not because they're controlling, but because they know their own direction well enough not to be pulled off course by every current that runs through their lives. There is also a cost to deciding that nobody warns you about. When you stop begging, when you genuinely stop, not everyone will celebrate that. Some people in your life have benefited from your uncertainty. Your lack of boundaries made things easier for them. Your constant availability was convenient. When you start deciding, some of those people will feel the loss of access they once had, and they will call your growth selfishness. They will call your boundaries coldness. They will call your confidence arrogance. Let them. That discomfort is not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a sign you're doing something different. What no man is told early enough is that respect, real, lasting respect, doesn't come from how much you give. It comes from how clear you are. A man who is clear about his values, clear about his time, clear about what he will and will not accept, generates a kind of gravity that no amount of generosity or people-pleasing can replicate. People may not always like a decided man, but they always know where they stand with him. And that clarity is rare enough in this world that it commands attention. The process of becoming a decided man is not a one-time event. It's a daily practice. Every morning you wake up and the old patterns are still there, right alongside the new ones. The pull toward comfort, toward approval, toward taking the path of least resistance. It doesn't disappear just because you've recognized it. It just becomes a choice rather than a default. And making that choice, consistently, over time. That is what builds character. Not the moments when it's easy, but the moments when every part of you wants to slip back into old habits, and you choose differently anyway. The men who understand this live differently. They carry themselves differently. Not with arrogance or performance. There's no need for that when you've genuinely settled into who you are. It's a steadiness, a groundedness. The kind that comes not from having figured everything out, but from having decided that regardless of what you haven't figured out, you will not abandon yourself in the process of searching. This is the foundation everything else is built on. Not money, not status, not the right partner or the right opportunity. Those things are important. We'll get to them. But none of them mean anything if the man pursuing them is still fundamentally waiting for someone to tell him he's allowed to go get them. You are allowed. You were always allowed. The only permission you ever needed was your own. So the question is not whether you are capable of becoming a decided man. The question is whether you are willing to stop pretending that the way you've been living, accommodating, second-guessing, minimizing, has been working. It hasn't. Not fully. And somewhere inside you, you already know that. That knowing is the beginning. The word standards has been weaponized. Somewhere in the cultural conversation, having standards became synonymous with being difficult, being unrealistic, being too much. Men who know what they want are called rigid. Men who won't settle are called alone by choice, as if that's an insult. And what this cultural messaging has produced is a generation of men who have quietly abandoned their standards, not because they believe it's right, but because they've been made to feel ashamed for having them in the first place. Let's be direct about what standards actually are. Standards are not demands you place on others. They are thresholds you set for yourself, for the quality of energy you allow into your life, for the behavior you accept in your relationships, for the environments you choose to operate in. A man with standards isn't looking for perfection. He's looking for alignment. He wants the people around him, the work he does, and the way he spends his days to align with the kind of life he's intentionally building. That's not arrogance, that's direction. The man without standards is not humble. He is unmoored. He drifts. He accepts situations that quietly drain him because he hasn't defined what would actually serve him. He stays in dynamics that cost him more than they give because he's never done the math. And over time, this lack of internal structure manifests in resentment, in exhaustion, in a vague but persistent sense that his life is happening to him rather than being built by him. Here's a truth worth sitting with. You teach people how to treat you, not through lectures or ultimatums, but through what you accept without comment, what you tolerate without boundary, and what you return to without hesitation after being treated poorly. Every time a man returns to a situation that diminished him without that situation having changed, he sends a clear message that the behavior was acceptable, that he can be treated that way, that there are no real consequences. Standards, enforced calmly and consistently, communicate the opposite. The decided man does not issue threats. He doesn't deliver ultimatums dramatically or make speeches about what he deserves. He simply acts in alignment with what he values. When something no longer aligns, he adjusts, not with anger, not with performance, but with a quiet decisiveness that communicates more than any argument ever could. This is a skill. It takes practice. But the more a man lives this way, the more natural it becomes. One of the most important standards a man can develop is around his time. Time is the only resource that cannot be recovered. Money lost can be earned again. Health with effort can often be rebuilt. But an hour gone is gone permanently. The man who treats his time carelessly, who gives it freely to whoever asks, who fills his days with obligations that serve other people's priorities, and none of his own, is a man who has not yet understood what he's trading. His most finite resource is being exchanged for approval, for acceptance, for the avoidance of discomfort. That is an extremely poor trade. Raising your standards is not an overnight transformation. It begins with observation. Sit with your own life and look at it honestly. Where are you consistently giving more than you're receiving? Where have you been accepting less than what you'd consider acceptable from yourself? Where are you showing up fully for situations and people who show up for you halfway? These questions are uncomfortable. They're supposed to be. The discomfort is the gap between where you are and where your standards should place you. The decided man also knows that his standards will cost him things. Relationships that only worked because he had no boundaries will not survive the introduction of them. Environments that depended on his compliance will become uncomfortable when he shows up with his own agenda. Friendships that were based on his availability rather than mutual respect will thin out. This is not a tragedy. This is the natural filtering process that happens when a man becomes clear about who he is and what he's building. The right people, the ones worth building with, will respect the clarity. The others were never really there for him anyway. One final thought for this chapter. Standards are not a ceiling. They are a floor. They don't limit what you can experience. They establish the minimum conditions under which you're willing to operate. Everything above that floor is open. Everything below it is not. A man who knows his floor is a man who can engage with the world freely because he knows at every moment that he will not accept a situation that fundamentally compromises who he is. That freedom, the freedom of a man who knows his own ground, is one of the most powerful things a human being can experience. Modern culture is loud. It rewards volume, reaction, and constant performance. In this environment, the temptation for a man is to perform his value, to talk more, post more, explain more, justify more, until the world finally acknowledges that he belongs in the room. But the decided man operates on a different frequency. He has discovered something that takes most men years to learn. Silence, deployed correctly, is one of the most powerful tools available to him. This is not about being closed off. It's not about emotional unavailability or playing games. It's about understanding the difference between communication that adds value and noise that fills space. When a man speaks less, what he does say carries more weight. When a man doesn't over-explain his decisions, those decisions project more confidence. When a man doesn't rush to fill every pause in a conversation with justification or reassurance, he signals that he is comfortable with himself, and that comfort is magnetic in a world full of people who are deeply uncomfortable in their own skin. Think about the men who have commanded real respect in your life. Not admiration, not popularity, but actual respect. The kind where you thought carefully before wasting their time. The kind where you listened when they finally did speak. Those men, almost universally, shared one trait. They did not feel the need to constantly prove themselves. They were not in a hurry to convince you of their value. Their presence communicated it. Most men leak value through over-communication. They text back immediately, every time, without exception, regardless of circumstance. They over-explain their plans to people who didn't ask. They justify their choices to people who have no business judging them. They share their struggles openly with people who haven't earned that level of trust. None of this is weakness in the moral sense. It's just strategically costly. Every unnecessary explanation is a small deposit made into someone else's account of how much access they have to you. Enough small deposits, and suddenly someone else holds a significant account in your life that you never intended to open. The decided man is selective. He's selective about who he opens up to, not because he's guarded, but because he understands that intimacy is a currency. You don't spend your most valuable currency carelessly. You invest it where it will grow, in relationships that are worthy of the depth, in conversations that will move something forward, in connections where the other person has demonstrated they can handle and honor what you share. Silence also applies to responses. One of the most underrated skills a man can develop is the ability to not respond immediately. Not every message requires an instant reply. Not every provocation requires an answer. Not every criticism requires a defense. The man who reacts instantly to everything is a man who is being steered by other people's agendas. The man who pauses, who breathes, who thinks, who chooses his moment, is always a step ahead of the conversation. There is also a version of silence that operates in conflict. When a man is accused, challenged, or provoked, the instinct is to respond in kind, to defend, to explain, to counter. But sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. Not out of passivity, but out of a clear-eyed recognition that the argument isn't worth the energy, or that the other person isn't in a place where they could hear an honest answer anyway. Deciding not to engage is still a decision. It can be the strongest one available. The practice of speaking with intention begins with listening. Most people are not listening during a conversation. They're waiting for their turn to talk, waiting for an opening, waiting for confirmation of what they already believe. The decided man actually listens. He takes in what is being said, processes it, and responds to what was actually communicated, not to what he assumed would be said. This makes his contributions to any conversation sharper, more relevant, and far more respected. Learning to be comfortable in silence also means learning to be comfortable alone with your thoughts. Many men fill every quiet moment with noise, podcasts, music, endless scrolling, because silence forces them to be alone with themselves. And being alone with themselves is where some uncomfortable truths live. The decided man has learned to go into that silence without flinching. He has sat with his own thoughts, examined them, and made peace with what he found, or committed to changing what he didn't like. That internal relationship with silence is the foundation of everything else. Say less, mean more. This is not a tactic. It is a reflection of a man who has enough inner substance that he doesn't need to fill the space to prove he belongs in it. To understand where we are, we need to understand where we came from. Not with nostalgia. Nostalgia is a trap that polishes the past until it shines in ways it never did in real life. But with honest, historical perspective. Because something has genuinely been lost in the transition between the man that previous generations knew themselves to be and the man that modern culture has been trying to redefine. For most of human history, a man's identity was organized around contribution. He was a builder, a protector, a provider, not in the diminishing, limiting sense that those words have been assigned in contemporary discourse, but in the genuinely noble sense of someone who takes responsibility for things larger than himself. A man built things, families, trades, communities, institutions. He extended his energy outward, into the world, in ways that created lasting value. This was not because men were superior. It was because this was the structure around which civilization organized itself, and men found meaning in that structure. Something changed, slowly, then rapidly. The structures dissolved. The roles became ambiguous. The language around masculinity shifted from descriptive to suspicious. Being a provider became problematic. Being protective became controlling. Being the kind of man who led, who took initiative, who made decisions, who moved forward with conviction, began to require a constant process of cultural justification that previous generations never had to perform. And in that exhausting process of constant justification, many men simply stopped. They opted out. Not because they were broken, but because the cost of engagement had become unclear and the reward had become invisible. The decided man of today is not trying to recreate the past. He's not interested in returning to a world that no longer exists, but he is interested in recovering something that exists outside of time, the principle of male purpose. The understanding that a man functions best when he is moving toward something, when he has a mission, when his days are organized around a direction he has chosen and a standard he has set for himself. This is not exclusive to men, but it is essential to them in a particular way. A man without direction is not just unfulfilled. He is dangerous to himself and often to the people around him. History also shows us something important about what happens when men's roles are honored versus when they are dismissed. The communities that thrived were the ones in which men had clear paths, not rigid cages, but clear paths toward becoming something, toward mastery of a craft, toward leadership of a family, toward protection of a community. When those paths exist and are honored, men rise to meet them. When they dissolve, men don't naturally find equivalent structures. They drift. They fill the void with substitutes, with consumption, with distraction, with the kind of low-stakes activity that simulates engagement without demanding growth. The decided man looks at this history not with resentment, but with understanding. He sees clearly that the drift is real, that the loss is real, and that the solution is personal before it is cultural. He cannot wait for the culture to reconstruct a path for him. He must build his own. He must decide what he is building toward, what principles will govern his life, what kind of man he intends to become. And then pursue that with the same seriousness that craftsmen of earlier generations pursued their trades, fully, consistently, without waiting for applause. The roots of male purpose are not complicated, even if they've been made to seem that way. They come down to three things: direction, discipline, and contribution. A man who knows where he's going, who holds himself to a standard in getting there, and who builds something that extends beyond his own comfort. That man is operating in alignment with something deep and genuine in his own nature. Not a stereotype, not a performance, a real, functional expression of what a man at his best actually is. Dreams are common. Every man has them. He pictures the life he wants, the business, the health, the relationships, the freedom to move through the world on his own terms. The distance between dreaming that life and living it is not talent. It is not luck. It is not circumstance, though circumstance is real and unfair and sometimes immovable. The distance between dreaming and living is discipline. And discipline is the one resource that no one can give you and no one can take from you. It is entirely, completely yours. The decided man has made a choice that most people never make. He has chosen difficulty over comfort in the short term because he understands the relationship between that difficulty and long-term freedom. He wakes up when he said he would, even when his body argues for 5 more minutes. He trains when he's tired, because the discipline of training when tired is exactly the kind of discipline that compounds into a body and a mind that can handle more. He works on his craft when inspiration is absent, because consistency in the absence of inspiration is what separates professionals from amateurs. Discipline is not punishment. This is a misunderstanding that keeps many men from embracing it. Discipline is not about suffering for its own sake. It's not about proving how much pain you can absorb or how little enjoyment you can allow yourself. Discipline is about the intentional structuring of your time and energy toward the things you've decided actually matter. It's about choosing your future self's freedom over your current self's comfort. Every time you make that choice, you're investing. And investments, made consistently over time, produce returns that seem almost inexplicable to people who haven't watched the process unfold. The discipline of the decided man shows up in the small things before it shows up in the large ones. His environment is ordered because he understands that external order supports internal clarity. His commitments are kept because he understands that a man who breaks commitments to himself will eventually break them to others. And the habit of integrity starts with what no one is watching. His decisions are made from values rather than moods, because he has done the work of establishing what he values before the pressure of a decision arrives and his mood is driving. One of the most important forms of discipline a man can develop is the discipline of his attention. We live in an era engineered to steal focus. Every screen, every notification, every piece of content is optimized to capture and hold your attention. Not because that attention is being invested in something that serves you, but because your attention is the product being sold. The man who allows his attention to be constantly captured is a man whose cognitive resources are constantly being redirected away from his own priorities and towards someone else's agenda. The decided man guards his attention like the finite resource it is. He chooses what he engages with, when, and for how long. Financial discipline is another pillar that cannot be overlooked. A man's relationship with money is a direct reflection of his relationship with his own future. The man who spends impulsively is borrowing from his future self without permission. The man who saves and invests, who lives below his means in the short term to build genuine options in the long term, is practicing one of the most concrete and measurable forms of self-respect available. Financial freedom is not about being wealthy in the absolute sense. It's about having enough resources that your decisions are made from choice rather than necessity. The discipline of the body is foundational in a way that modern convenience has made easy to overlook. A man's physical condition is not just aesthetic, it is functional. A trained body handles stress better. It thinks more clearly. It recovers faster. It carries itself differently. And the way a man carries himself communicates to every room he enters how seriously he takes himself. The decided man trains not to impress others, but because he understands that his body is the vessel through which everything else in his life happens, and a neglected vessel limits everything it carries. Discipline in relationships means showing up consistently, not just when it's easy. It means having the uncomfortable conversation rather than letting resentment accumulate. It means maintaining your standards even when lowering them would be less friction in the moment. It means being the kind of person that people can count on, not because you're performing reliability, but because reliability is a core part of who you've decided to be. The decided man does not expect perfection from his discipline. He misses days. He makes decisions he later regrets. He sometimes chooses comfort when he said he wouldn't. The difference between him and the man who never builds anything is not that he never fails. It's that failure doesn't change the direction. He gets up, he adjusts, he continues. The direction remains fixed even when the path through it is not perfectly straight. Discipline, in the end, is freedom in disguise. Every man who has achieved it will tell you the same thing. The structure, which felt constraining from the outside, is actually what makes genuine freedom possible. Because when your basic responsibilities are handled with consistency, your creative energy is freed for expansion. The man who manages himself well can direct his remaining energy toward growth, toward exploration, toward the larger projects that make life feel meaningful. That is the promise of discipline. Not a smaller life, but a larger one. A man can be fully committed to another person and still remain fully himself. This sounds obvious when stated plainly, but the reality is that most men in most relationships are operating somewhere on a spectrum between partial and total self-abandonment, often without realizing it. The slow erosion begins with small compromises that feel like generosity. It continues with accommodations that feel like love, and it ends, if unchecked, with a man who has so thoroughly organized his life around someone else's comfort that he has lost the thread back to his own. The decided man loves differently, not less, in fact, often more deeply, because what he brings to a relationship is full, not fragmented. He has not divided himself between who he is and who he thinks he needs to be to maintain the relationship. He has arrived whole. And a whole man in a relationship is a fundamentally different experience for both people than a man who is perpetually managing his own presentation to keep the peace. What does it mean to love without losing yourself? It begins with understanding that your partner, whoever they are or may be, does not want the performance of you. They want you, the version of you that has opinions, that takes up space, that sometimes disagrees, that has things he cares about independently of the relationship. When a man flattens himself in a relationship, agreeing constantly, abandoning his interests, changing his plans on demand, losing contact with his own friendships, he doesn't make the relationship better. He slowly makes himself invisible. And you cannot build a genuine connection with someone who has made himself invisible. Boundaries in relationships are not walls. They are definitions. A man who communicates clearly what he needs, what he is and isn't willing to accept, what matters to him, is a man who makes genuine partnership possible. Because you can only truly meet someone where they are when they're actually somewhere. A man without clear values and limits is nowhere in particular. He's just available. And availability without substance is not the foundation of anything lasting. The decided man also understands the importance of choosing wisely, not from a place of cold calculation, but from a place of clear-eyed observation. He pays attention to how a person treats others. He notices consistency over time, rather than being swept up in early intensity. He looks for evidence of genuine character, patience, honesty, generosity, emotional stability, rather than surface-level chemistry, which is real but insufficient as a long-term foundation. The man who chooses based entirely on attraction and excitement, without observing character, is setting himself up to build on sand. One of the most honest things a man can do in a relationship is maintain his own life, his friendships, his pursuits, his goals, his time alone. These are not threats to intimacy. They are the conditions that make intimacy sustainable. Two people who have nothing of their own to bring to each other eventually have nothing to talk about. The decided man keeps filling his own cup through his work, his growth, his relationships outside the romantic one, so that what he brings into that relationship is renewable, not finite. The decided man does not beg for love. He doesn't plead for connection. He doesn't perform constantly to earn what should be given freely in a genuine relationship. And when something is not freely given, when he is in a dynamic that requires him to constantly justify his presence or earn basic respect, he has the clarity to name that and the courage to act accordingly. Not with drama, not with bitterness, but with the quiet decisiveness that defines everything else about how he moves. Every decided man has a North Star, not a vague aspiration or a fantasy, a real, defined direction toward which he moves consistently, even when the path is unclear. His mission, the thing he is building, the contribution he is making, the standard he is holding himself to over the long arc of his life. Without this North Star, everything else discussed in this series, the discipline, the standards, the silence, the clarity, becomes untethered. It's discipline in service of nothing, clarity about nothing in particular. Mission gives context to sacrifice. When a man knows what he's building, the sacrifices required to build it don't feel like losses. They feel like investments. The nights he doesn't go out, the comfort he postpones, the relationships he doesn't pursue because they would pull him off course. These aren't deprivations, they are choices. And choices made in service of something larger than momentary comfort are the substance of a life that feels, at the end, like it meant something. The mission doesn't need to be grand. It doesn't need to change the world in a way that earns headlines. For some men, the mission is building a business that creates opportunity for others. For some, it's raising children with values that will outlast them. For some, it's mastering a craft so completely that the work itself becomes a form of testimony. For some, it's achieving financial independence so that his choices in life are genuinely free. The size of the mission is irrelevant. The clarity and commitment to it are everything. What kills mission is not failure. Failure is a natural part of any serious pursuit. What kills mission is drift, the gradual, barely perceptible movement away from your direction as distractions accumulate and small compromises compound. A man who doesn't actively maintain his sense of direction will find, months or years later, that he has traveled a significant distance from where he intended to go. The decided man builds in regular recalibration, moments of honest assessment where he asks himself whether his daily actions are actually aligned with the direction he claims to be heading. The mission also provides a filter. When opportunities arise, and they do constantly, the decided man runs them through his filter. Does this move me toward my mission, or does it move me away from it? Some of the most attractive seeming opportunities are actually elaborate detours. They offer immediate reward, money, status, excitement, but at the cost of direction. The man who can consistently choose his direction over the appeal of attractive detours is the man who actually arrives somewhere. Purpose also provides resilience. The man without a mission is devastated by setbacks, because a setback is just a setback. There's no larger context in which it becomes meaningful. The man with a mission can absorb setbacks differently. He can ask, what does this teach me that serves the larger project? How do I use this obstacle as training? The mission converts adversity from a stop sign into a teaching tool. And that reframing is not positive thinking. It's the practical wisdom of a man who understands that the road toward anything worth building is never smooth. Finally, mission connects a man to legacy. Not in the ego-driven sense of wanting to be remembered, though that's not unworthy, but in the deeper sense of understanding that his actions today extend beyond today. The decisions he makes, the standards he holds, the work he produces, the character he builds, these ripple forward in ways he may never fully see. The decided man takes that seriously. He understands that how he conducts himself is not just about his current comfort or pleasure. It is the message he sends to the world and to the people watching him about what is possible for a man who decides. There are two experiences that are essential to a man's inner life, and they are not opposites, even though they might appear to be. The first is brotherhood, genuine, honest, loyal connection with other men who are building, who have standards, who call each other to higher ground. The second is solitude, the deliberate practice of being alone with your own thoughts, your own values, your own direction, without the noise of the world telling you who to be. A man who has both of these in his life is a man with a deeply stable inner foundation. A man who has neither is adrift. Brotherhood is rare. Most men have acquaintances. They have people they socialize with, people they work alongside, people they grew up near. But genuine brotherhood, the kind where men hold each other accountable, where honesty is prioritized over comfort, where the relationship is built on mutual respect and shared values rather than shared history or convenience, that is genuinely rare. And it's rare in part because it requires something that casual connection doesn't. vulnerability in the presence of standards. The willingness to say, "I'm struggling," to a man who will not use that confession against you, but also will not coddle you unnecessarily. The decided man actively seeks and builds this kind of connection. He identifies the men in his life who are genuinely trying to grow, who are serious about their work, who maintain their integrity, who don't celebrate mediocrity in themselves or others, and he invests in those relationships disproportionately, not at the expense of loyalty to old friendships, but with an honest recognition that the company you keep shapes who you become, and that intentional community is part of intentional living. Solitude is equally vital and far more misunderstood. Modern culture has pathologized aloneness. A man who spends time alone, genuinely alone, not just physically isolated while scrolling through a phone, is often seen as lonely, antisocial, or depressed. But the men who have built something meaningful in this world have almost universally maintained a practice of solitude, not because they didn't value connection, they did deeply, but because they understood that clarity of thought, of values, of direction, cannot be outsourced. It has to come from within. And it only comes from within when you give it the quiet it needs to surface. Solitude is where the decided man processes. He takes in information throughout his day, feedback, challenges, interactions, experiences, and solitude is where he digests it. Without that digestive process, everything accumulates unprocessed, and the man operates on the surface of his own experience without ever going deep enough to actually learn from it. Regular solitude, even just 30 minutes of genuine quiet, uninterrupted, with no input, is one of the highest leverage habits a man can build. There is also a version of solitude that is specifically about sitting with discomfort. When something is bothering a man, a decision he's avoiding, a truth he's resisting, a pattern he knows he needs to break, solitude is where he goes to face it. Not to dwell or ruminate, but to look at it directly, name it accurately, and decide what to do. Many men use busyness, noise, and social stimulation to avoid this kind of confrontation with themselves. The decided man does the opposite. He creates the conditions in which honesty can emerge, even when honesty is uncomfortable. Brotherhood and solitude work together. The solitude gives you clarity about who you are. The brotherhood gives you the courage to live that clarity in community, to be honest, to be held accountable, to be seen in your full reality by men who will affirm what's good and challenge what isn't. This combination, inner work and outer accountability, is one of the most powerful developmental engines available to a man at any stage of his life. Build brotherhood intentionally. Protect your solitude fiercely. Both are investments in the quality of the life you're building, not just what you achieve, but who you are while you're achieving it. There is no version of a meaningful life that doesn't include substantial difficulty. Not one. The men who have built things that matter, in business, in relationships, in service, in art, all went through periods that would have ended lesser commitments. They faced failure, rejection, financial loss, public embarrassment, private devastation. They kept going, not because they were immune to pain, but because their relationship with difficulty was fundamentally different from the man who quits when things get hard. The decided man understands difficulty as information, not as punishment, not as evidence that he's on the wrong path, not as a sign that he should stop. Difficulty is the feedback mechanism of a life lived at the edge of your current capacity. If everything is smooth, you're not growing, you're coasting. And coasting feels comfortable right up until it doesn't. And then you realize you haven't built anything in the coasting that will carry you through what's coming. The decided man stays at his edge, And at the edge, difficulty is the constant companion. One of the most important distinctions a man can make is between productive suffering and unproductive suffering. Productive suffering is the discomfort of growth, the soreness after a hard workout, the frustration of a skill not yet mastered, the emotional difficulty of an honest conversation, the financial pressure of building something before it's profitable. This suffering serves a purpose. It is the cost of transformation, and it compounds into capability. Unproductive suffering is the pain of dwelling, of rumination, of replaying what cannot be changed, of marinating in resentment toward situations or people that have no intention of changing. The decided man minimizes the second and accepts the first without complaint. When adversity arrives, and it will arrive, the decided man's first move is not emotional, it is operational. What happened? What can I control about this? What is the next decision that needs to be made? This is not emotional suppression, it is sequencing. Emotion has its place, it will come, and it should be processed. But in the acute phase of adversity, the most useful thing a man can do is think clearly and act deliberately. Falling apart is a luxury that the decided man defers until the immediate situation has been handled. Resilience is built in training, not in the crisis. The man who has been consistently practicing discipline, who has been keeping his commitments even when it's inconvenient, who has been choosing difficulty over comfort in small ways, that man has already built the internal infrastructure to handle large adversity. His muscles of perseverance are developed. His capacity to continue in the absence of immediate reward is established. When the real test comes, he doesn't have to discover that capacity from scratch. It's already there. There are also men who are currently in their hardest chapter. Men who are reading this in the middle of something that hasn't resolved yet. A loss, a failure, a situation that feels like it's consuming everything. To those men, the decided man is not the man who never suffers. He is the man who suffers without surrendering his direction. You are allowed to be in pain and still be moving forward. These are not contradictions. They are the simultaneous reality of a man who has not given up on what he is building, even when what he is building is, for now, just himself. The decided man emerges from adversity changed, not in his direction, but in his depth. He knows things about himself that comfortable men don't know. He has capacity that was invisible to him before the difficulty revealed it. He carries a confidence that cannot be faked or bought, the confidence of a man who has been genuinely tested and has continued. This is the irreplaceable gift that adversity, survived with integrity, leaves behind. Everything in this series has been leading here, not to a conclusion, because a decided man's journey doesn't conclude, it evolves, but to a beginning, a deliberate, chosen, fully owned beginning from wherever you are right now. Because the power of everything discussed across these chapters is not theoretical, it is practical. It is available to you, specifically today. Regardless of your age, your circumstances, your history, or how far you feel you might be from the life you want. The first thing to understand is that building a decided life is a project, not an event. You don't become a decided man in the duration of a video series. You decide to become one. And then you build that reality through the accumulation of thousands of smaller decisions made over months and years. The decision is the beginning. The building is the life. And every day you wake up, you get another set of materials to work with. The question is always, what are you going to build today? Take inventory. Honestly, without self-pity and without self-aggrandizement, look at the current state of your life across the dimensions that matter. Your health. Is your body being treated like an asset or an afterthought? Your finances. Are your resources being directed toward your future or being consumed by your present comfort? Your relationships. Are the people closest to you people who elevate, challenge, and genuinely support you? Your work. Is what you spend most of your waking hours doing moving you toward something? Or is it simply filling time in exchange for a paycheck? Your mind. Is it sharp, engaged, growing? Or is it dulled by passive consumption and the avoidance of hard thinking? These are not comfortable questions, but the decided man asks them regularly, not to punish himself with what's missing, but to use the gap between where he is and where he wants to be as actionable information. The gap is not a verdict on his worth, it is a map. It shows him where his next decisions need to go. Start where you are, not where you wish you were, not where you think you should be by now, where you actually are. A man who starts from honest assessment of his real position is already ahead of the man who's operating from a distorted picture. You can only navigate from your actual coordinates. Everything else is fiction. Make one decision today, a real one, not a resolution, that aligns with the man you're becoming. It doesn't need to be large. In fact, the smaller and more concrete, the better. Wake up at a specific time tomorrow and honor it. Send the email you've been avoiding. Cancel the subscription you know isn't serving you. Have the conversation you've been postponing. Start the first 5 minutes of the habit you've been putting off. These small, concrete acts of alignment are not symbolic. They are actual construction. Every one of them is a brick in the foundation of the life you are building. Revisit your direction regularly. The world will constantly offer you detours, attractive, legitimate-seeming detours that will take you somewhere interesting, but not somewhere you decided to go. The decided man returns, regularly and deliberately, to his North Star. He asks, is what I'm doing right now in service of what I've decided to build? If yes, full speed. If no, he adjusts without drama and returns to course. Hold yourself to the standard you've set, not with punishment when you fall short, but with accountability. There is a version of you that already lives the life you're building toward. That man is not a fantasy. He is the logical outcome of the decisions you make from this point forward. Every decision made in alignment with that version of you brings him closer. Every decision made against your values moves him further away. You are not at the mercy of fate. You are in a daily, ongoing negotiation with your own future. Negotiate wisely. The decided man is not perfect. He is not finished. He is not without doubt or difficulty or days when the whole project seems harder than it should be. But he is moving. He has direction. He has standards. He has a practice of discipline that compounds over time. He has relationships that reflect who he actually is rather than who he's performing for others. He has a mission that gives context to everything he sacrifices and everything he builds, and he has the fundamental clarity, earned through honest self-examination and consistent action, that he is the author of his own life, not the victim of it. That is what it means to be a decided man, not a perfect man, not an invulnerable man, a decided one who has looked at his life, has chosen his direction, and has committed to moving toward it, fully, consistently, and without apology. That man is available to you. He has always been available to you. He's waiting for you to stop asking and start deciding. If you've made it to the end of this, you already know that something has shifted. Maybe it's small right now, a thought you couldn't have articulated before this series started, a clarity that wasn't quite there at the beginning. That shift is not nothing. That shift is how it starts. Every man who built something real started with exactly that, a quiet but irreversible change in how he understood himself and what was possible. The decided man doesn't wait for the perfect moment. He doesn't wait to feel ready, to have all the information, to have everyone's approval. He moves with what he has, from where he is, toward what he's decided. He knows that momentum creates clarity in ways that waiting never can. So the call right now is simple. Take one decided action in the next 24 hours. Just one. Build from there. Drop a comment and tell me what that action is going to be. I read every single one. If this series has meant something to you, share it with a man you believe in, because the content that reaches the right man at the right moment has the power to change the trajectory of a life. Thank you for watching. Now go decide.